Hey parents, just wanted to give you a heads up before you listen to today's episode that we talk about some adult themes today that really should only be discussed by grown-ups. So if you are listening with your kids or have your kids around, I wanted to make sure that they are not within earshot. Thanks and enjoy the show. Welcome back to another episode of Creedle. I am very excited today to be joined by one of my favorite authors. I have to say I only recently discovered Kat's work in the past couple years. But she has become a must-read for me with what she writes, mostly at Unheard. She's an Unheard columnist and co-host of the Feminine Chaos podcast. And she's also a novelist. I recently read her 2021 novel called No One Will Miss Her, and I'm looking forward to diving into that with her today. But Kat, welcome to Creedle.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I'm excited to have you on here. I think one of the good things about the sort of, we might call it the sort of substackification of media, Kat, is that it allows people like me to find alternative voices who are just writing really interesting things, getting away from the sort of New York Times and Wall Street Journals of the world, and finding great young writers who are saying things that may not be totally mainstream, but are really worth saying. And you are definitely one of those for me. I think I'd first found you on Twitter. I don't remember, probably someone I was following you or retweeted you or something. And then I started reading some of the things that you had written at Unheard and some other places. And just found myself like nodding along in agreement with a lot of the things that you were saying, and thinking this is someone who's not afraid to be sort of countercultural, or at the very least sort of counter to the mainstream. And has a really good way with words, and is not afraid of saying what needs to be said. So I really appreciate the things that you've written. But tell me more about your Feminine Chaos podcast. I have not listened to the podcast. So what's your aim with that, and what kind of things do you talk about there? I think you're one half of it, right? So you're one of the two co-hosts.
Yeah, my co-host is actually currently on maternity leave, so I've been holding down the fort by myself, just having guests. And it's basically anybody who I think might be interesting to talk to. So it's the podcast happened sort of by accident. Phoebe, who is my usual co-host, and I used to discuss things on Twitter, and it was, obviously a very fragmented conversation, as Twitter lends itself to. And people started asking us to have a long form chat. So that was, I guess, in maybe 2018. And we joined the Blogging Heads Network. We had a video podcast on there. And podcasting is not something that I ever really planned on doing or had, a lot of like native interest in doing, but it turns out that it's actually a lot of fun. As you were talking about, the ability to sort of discuss things in a way that's a little outside the mainstream, or maybe a little more nuanced. Podcasting is great for that, not least because nobody is going to hate listen to an hour-long conversation just to take
Very
something
true.
out of context to try to ruin your life with. So it's a little safer in that respect. And it just allows for to speak to somebody, to be able to hear their voice and have them hear yours. I think it lends itself to a better discussion than a lot of what happens online.
Now, do you and Phoebe record in the same physical room, or have you done the remote recording thing? Because I find that the first is obviously a lot better to just carry conversation and obviously have like chemistry during discussion. The latter can have some challenges with that. So what have you found works for you?
Well, actually, we've never had the opportunity to record in the same room. She and I have never met in real life. She lives.
Oh my goodness, no way.
We were going to meet up there and, see each other's legs for the first time. But then obviously the world ended and the pandemic made everything impossible. So, I still have not met her in real life, even though she's, one of my closest friends. So hopefully soon.
Yeah, no kidding. That I hope so for your sake as well. And it'd be cool if you could do an in-person recording when you do meet for the first time, just to experience what that sort of co-host chemistry is like.
Yeah, that would be great.
Well, let's dive in, Kat, to one of your recent pieces. It was the one that I read that caught my eye, I think a month and a half ago or so, and I reached out to you and said, hey, Kat, would love to have you on the podcast to talk about this. This is one of your pieces relatively recently in Unheard, where you are a columnist, and it's called The Death of Intimacy. And in diving into this so-called death of intimacy, you also called a sexual famine, you talk about how young people are really unable to achieve intimacy, or perhaps even unwilling, maybe more tellingly so, unwilling. You say, for example, in the era, this is all a quote from you, in the era of the algorithm, the personal brand, the Tinder marketplace, perhaps all sex carries a whiff of transaction, whether or not any money changes hands. And in a world where young single people are increasingly taught to be frightened of any threat to their safety, emotional, not just physical, the prospect of true intimacy grows ever distant, ever more impossible. That's one of your contentions in the piece. And I've been thinking about this a lot. I actually, prior to reading your piece, a couple weeks prior, I think I had read Ross Douthat on the sort of death of passion in cinema. And he was making a similar argument that we need more sex in the movies, more sort of passion in the movies, more love stories in the movies, because all of the love stories are either sort of like Nicholas Sparks style fantasy, or they are merely just sort of depictions of transactional sexual encounters. And so I was thinking about that as I was reading your piece as well. And you talk about a lot of these sort of driving factors in this sexual famine, as you call it. But let's start there. Maybe what do you think, in your view, what is driving this lack of capacity, if we can call it that, for intimacy among young people today?
I think it's a combination of things. And, the transactional nature of things that you were just talking about is interesting. The reason that I ended up writing that piece was that I attended a talk by Ayla. She's a sex worker. She works on OnlyFans. And she talked a lot about the spreadsheet that she keeps that documents all of her encounters, both the ones that she has for work and the ones that she has just for fun, for her own self, for relationships. And it was really interesting to me to think about how the nature of sex right now and the nature of intimacy kind of lends itself to that sort of data-driven, like transactional approach, where you would put it all on a spreadsheet and try to like analyze it and try to make it make sense. I think that speaks to a desire that is understandable, but doesn't actually serve us all that well, to try to make our world safer, more organized, more digestible. You're talking about things that are inherently incredibly messy, love and sex and physical intimacy. It's really hard to like plot these out as data points, but people want to do it because they've learned to be fearful of having their feelings hurt. There's this sense, I think, amongst some people that like, if they just have enough rules or they just like analyze the data right, then they'll be able to kind of hack the entire romantic process in such a way that they'll never actually have to open themselves up to having their feelings hurt. It's a nice fantasy, but it just doesn't work that way, and it doesn't work, period. So that's part of it. The other thing, of course, is the rise of technology as our primary intermediary for communication. A lot of the stuff that used to happen face to face, where, there used to be maybe even skin to skin contact. And I don't mean like sexually. I mean, sitting next to somebody at a table and allowing your forearm to brush against theirs, or smelling their shampoo, or just feeling like sort of the physical presence, the heat and the weight of them next to you. These are things that are increasingly absent from like courtship, which doesn't really exist anymore in the sense that people usually talk about it. But young people, teenagers particularly, are mostly communicating now with the screen in between them, and so that entire valence, the physical and the sort of the tension that it builds to be in a physical space with somebody, that's all absent. I think that there's something too in the way that technology has moved us in the direction of trying to make our lives increasingly frictionless, which feels very convenient, but it makes us less and less able to work our sort of like emotional skill set, to get used to the inherent friction of flirtation, of sparking a relationship with somebody, of being uncertain, and of opening yourself up to emotional intimacy or physical intimacy. The more you try to make things smooth and easy, the less practice you get at something that's inherently, exciting but uncomfortable, and unpredictable. So that was a really long-winded answer. Sorry.
No, that's super helpful though. I mean, when I read your piece, and I've read it a couple times, once the first time and then another time last night, just to prepare for our discussion today. Um, what I understood from you was like, look, this is what's happened, and this is how young people are thinking about sexuality and sort of experimenting with their sexuality right now. And who's to blame them? Because of course we've like digitized their entire environment here, and we've made it so that they can have these sort of we might call them low risk or no risk sexual interactions, all mediated by a screen. So there's no, one type of risk is something like actually biological, like STDs. But another type of risk is just like the fear of rejection, right? Like there's anytime you go to a bar and you try to pick up someone at the bar, there's a fear that you might be rejected. And then there's the awkward encounter after the rejection, in which you have to, collect yourself and pick yourself up and walk away after the rejection. And you just don't have that same thing online. You have like the Tinder environment where you only encounter someone if you've both mutually thumbed up, and if you message them and they ghost you, then okay, like there's no like skin in the game. To pick up on what you were saying about sort of skin to skin contact, there's no real skin in the game in the digital world. So who's to blame then? Do I have that right?
Yeah, I mean that's certainly part of it. The sense of us owing something to each other, and the way that you might have to be considerate of a person's feelings if they're approaching you in public, and you have to see their face as you say, no, thank you, I don't want to date you.
Right.
I think that there is something inherent. It makes us much more conscious of just being good to each other. It's not about being afraid to say no. It's about being considerate with your no. Understanding that this person has risked something by approaching you. You talk about this from the perspective of, having to kind of work up the nerve to approach somebody, and that's a huge deal. And I think that it's gotten really hard for young men at this point, because there's this sense now that you need to have consent just to approach somebody. I think that's really, really messing with people. But on top of that, there's also the way that young women respond to being approached as though it's like a threat or an insult, as though it's their job to kind of to dunk on the person who's made themselves vulnerable by approaching them. I think that's a really ugly impulse, and it's something that is really encouraged by the way that dynamics play out online, but it's something that we shouldn't be encouraging. It's making everything a lot worse.
Yeah, I could not agree with you more on that specific point. What role do you think pornography and the ubiquity of pornography plays in this sort of sexual famine as well? I know you mentioned a little bit in your article, but it's not primarily about that. But I just think about the easy access that so many people have to it, both men and women, and how it idealizes the sexual experience in a way that real life can't possibly replicate. Or it distorts in the sense that like it makes you think that sort of, that you would expect your sexual partner's body to look a certain way that it can't possibly look, because all of that is just cosmetic and synthetic. Or it perverts the sexual experience and makes you think that, deviant sexual behaviors are actually the norm, or that's what's expected, or that's what should be required, or that's what you should enjoy, or that's what you should do as a partner. So to what extent do you think that plays a role in this sexual famine as well?
So, as I understand it, and I fortunately have not experienced this myself, but the ubiquity of pornography, and particularly when it comes to being a formative influence on young men who are like, this may be the first sex that they ever encounter, is like hardcore internet porn, that it's definitely shaping their expectations of what sex is supposed to be and what they're supposed to want, how they're supposed to behave in ways that are really not good for anyone. Apparently it's very ubiquitous now, for young women who are dating to find themselves being choked during a sexual encounter without consent. I think the problem is that pornography makes it seem like this is a thing that women like and want, and want automatically. I don't really know what the solution is to that. I've seen it suggested, and I don't think it's a bad idea, that, moving forward, sex education in schools needs to include a porn is not real segment, that, addresses whatever kind of bonkers expectations people might be developing as a result of being exposed to porn too early or, to the exclusion of other types of sexual encounters. Sorry, I've got a dog wanting to bark behind me. He's kind of revving up.
I hear the revving. Yeah.
And the other thing too is that the ubiquity of internet pornography came around at the same time as feminism kind of embraced this like sex positive valence where, rather than being, a kind of a default no sexually, young women were now told that they should be like basically up for anything. And, and that if they weren't, that was a bad thing because it meant that they were like not liberated or they were prude or they were like afraid of physical intimacy. And so, to have that being kind of like a powerful pressure force for young women at the same time as all of the young men who grew up watching like, anal on the first encounter or choking or all of these other things that like you don't really want to do the first time that you're ever naked with somebody. They're sure. coming out like they're coming into the sexual marketplace thinking like, yeah, this is what we're going to do. And you have these young women who are like, I guess this is what we're doing. Like, I don't want to say that I'm not into this. I don't want to seem like I'm, like I'm a prude. So yeah, there's a lot of unhealthy expectations kind of swirling around. And nevertheless, despite the fact that, porn is everywhere and, and there's less and less stigma attached to sex, people are still very uncomfortable talking about it. So there's sort of this wall of silence in between the sex people are having and then the sex that they actually want that's not being crossed. And it probably be.
Yeah, no, you're 100% correct on my view of things, at least. I think one interesting dynamic that we should maybe talk about as a final discussion point on this specific issue is the collision of this sort of formative role that pornography plays in the lives of especially young men, and the Me Too movement and women's empowerment, because it just strikes me that we've arrived at this very incoherent clash of ideas. And you mentioned this in your piece briefly, where on the one hand we have men who have been formed by pornography and have these completely unrealistic and I would go so far as to say dehumanizing expectations for sexual encounters. And on the other hand, we have women who, as you say, after Me Too, are afraid to let their guard down for even a single moment. And so you have this sort of inability to be vulnerable on the one hand, and then you have like a desire to abuse vulnerability on the other hand. And so we've arrived at this sort of like, when you pose it that way, it sounds like a very intractable problem. And I don't know where we go from there, but I'm wondering if you agree even with the way that I've framed the problem just now.
Yeah, I mean, that rings mostly true to me. I think that it's mainly an issue of trust. And, it's unfortunate to have to say so, but the lack of, let's see, what's the word I'm looking for? The lack of weight at this point given to, forming a relationship with somebody, even if it's, just going on a few dates before you have sex with them. Sorry, buddy, you got to take it easy. He's like, I don't want you talking about this. I'm uncomfortable.
Yeah.
That is contributing to a lot of these encounters where there's just like no basic level of knowledge or trust between the two people who are engaging with each other in like the most intimate, literally naked way. And it's when you try to suggest, obviously, that maybe like things should be different, that's seen as prude, or it's seen as slut shaming. So yeah, I'm not really sure where I'm going with this. The dog barking kind of made me lose my train of thought. But something that I think a lot about is the idea that sex is that if you're ever uncomfortable, it means something really bad is happening to you. And that's sort of where the rhetoric has landed at this point as we become very focused on consent and the notion of enthusiastic consent. It's like, if at any moment you're not 1,000% like, yeah, gung ho into this, it means that something really traumatic and really terrible is happening to you. This is the thing that we've been telling young people and young women particularly for several years now. And I don't think that it's having a good impact on them. It is creating this sense that sex in and of itself is incredibly dangerous, incredibly fraught, not really the kind of thing anybody would ever want to do for fun. And I think that we're kind of setting young people up to fail if they're coming into like their first sexual experiences, with the idea that like, if they're ever uncomfortable, if they ever feel, anything less than totally confident and enthusiastic about what they're doing, that it means that they're doing it wrong, or they're being assaulted, they're experiencing trauma. It just, completely apart from what might actually happen during a given encounter, like with that mindset, who's going to have a good time? Everyone's just going to be scared and waiting for something bad to happen.
So I guess the question is, where do we go from here? I mean, what's the solution? I mean, you mentioned one possible small way of getting at the pornography problem, which is to include the porn is not real module in sex education. You and I probably differ on this. I tend to not have a classical liberal position at all when it comes to pornography. I definitely favor really stringent regulations on pornography, perhaps even outright banning of it. I'm open to that idea. Because I think it's just so devastatingly dangerous and corrupts people's lives in ways that we're only now just beginning to understand after decades of just free-flowing pornography, and the internet has magnified it. I'm guessing you don't agree with me on that point. But like, what is the solution to this? How do we get people past the sexual famine and help them have real encounters with each other again?
It would be great if teenagers started dating in person. Obviously that's partly up to them, but it's also partly up to parents to, take a step back. I think that the ubiquity of helicopter parenting, and monitoring what your kid is doing, I understand that it's well intended and that it's hard for parents to take a step back, especially when the tools to do this are at their disposal. But what's being cultivated is basically an inability to make independent decisions, to form organic connections with other kids, like or other young people. It sounds weird to say, but I think that teenagers now would really benefit from the experience that a lot of us had, growing up before cell phones were a thing, where like you could disappear together for a few hours, like you could go fumble in the backseat of a car somewhere, and nobody got hurt. You might bump your head on like, the armrest or whatever. Maybe that's not super pleasant. But, you have these moments where you're in person with somebody who like relatively well. There's a sense of trust there. There's a sense of you're both inexperienced, you're both figuring things out, you're both kind of working your way through something. And not trying to retreat behind this technological veil that, removes some of the danger, but also leaves you inexperienced and naive and unable to connect with people.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. Let's pivot gears just a little bit and talk about another recent Unheard article. This is again maybe just more like intractable problems that we don't know how to escape from. But you have a very I found a rather entertaining piece called AOC is the New Trump, in which you review a recent sort of biography or a collection of biographical essays about AOC. So maybe let's start there. Tell my listeners what this book is and give us like your 60-second review.
Oh gosh. Okay, so this book is it's really like anthropologically it's fascinating that it even exists. It's called Take Up Space: The Unprecedented AOC. And it's released by New York Magazine, which has sort of appointed itself like the unofficial fanzine for AOC. I guess,
Which is crazy to me. Yeah.
it's true. I mean, I used to write for New York Magazine's Culture Vertical. They're a very prestigious outlet. Like they do really, really good work in a lot of respects. I think that this is a strange like angle for them to have decided to claim for themselves, but I don't know, it seems to be working for them, so whatever. So the book is a short biography about her, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's rise to power, her kind of upset win where she became a congresswoman. She ousted first like a long time Democrat, like a more moderate Democrat from her district, in the primaries, and then she won the election very handily. So half of that is a biography, and then the other half is essays reflecting on basically everything about her. They're talking about her beauty, talking about her social media usage, talking about her boyfriend, talking about her Hispanic heritage, all of this stuff, and it's really, like I said, it's a real interesting book. There is like in the very, very center of it, this 2-page full color, extremely close up, extremely high definition spread that's just her open mouth with her signature red lipstick on it. Like weirdest centerfold ever. It's like if you had an oratory fetish, this book is for you.
I think you might have, did you post a picture of that on
I
Twitter?
did. I posted a picture of it.
Okay.
I was like, this is so bizarre. And
yeah, I saw it and I was like, that is the strangest mid-fold that I've ever seen in a biography. That's an interesting editorial choice.
Yeah, and I think the thing is, this book really, it says something fascinating about the culture and about what role politicians currently play in it. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is a great example of what happens when you have somebody who has more influence than power and is kind of leaning into that. I was surprised to learn when I started, researching the background on her to write my book review that she's actually not very effective thus far at getting any legislation passed. So most of like the most visible stuff, the most impactful stuff she's done is stirring up shit. Oh, can I say shit on your podcast? Sorry.
No, sure. Yeah.
Stirring up stuff online. And, that is at this point its own form of currency, maybe even like a greater and more impactful form of currency socially and culturally than just like working to do your job as a congresswoman. So, I think the book itself just, it says something about where we are right now. I'm sort of like, I'm open-minded on AOC herself. Like, I'm not a super fan. I don't like the way she conducts herself online. I think it's really distasteful for the same reasons I found Trump very distasteful. But, I mean, she has a long career ahead of her. She may do one thing or another. Like, she may become an incredibly powerful figure in politics, or she may just kind of, decide to go off and actually be a legit influencer and make her mark that way. Which, I don't really care either way. But I think that the fact that this book exists, that somebody felt compelled to make this when she's been in office for like 2 years, and there's already just this like cult of personality around her. It's really, really interesting. And it's maybe worth reading to understand that alone.
Yeah, your review made me want to pick up a copy just to understand that a little bit more. But I mentioned that this was just a slight pivot from our previous topic on the sexual famine, and I think it is only a slight pivot because there's a linkage between these two things, and that's that both of these ideas, the sort of the AOC possibility, even the Trump possibility, is only possible because of our sort of digital first age, where performance matters much more than substance. And I think politics has always been performative. You go back to the great oratory debates of the late 19th century between various senators in the halls of the Capitol building. People being hit by canes. I think there was a cane attack in the U.S. Senate at one point. Like, politics has always had this very performative element. But I think previously part of the performance was, in fact, the substance. And now I don't think that's the case anymore. I think it's the case that Trump can perform very effectively on Twitter for his base and do almost nothing or do things badly from a policy standpoint while in office. And the same is true of someone like AOC. As you mentioned, one of the least effective congressmen, if you measure how effectively she gets legislation passed or passes even a single piece of legislation, but certainly the most well-known congresswoman in the entire country, and someone who has millions and millions of people following her across TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter, and has a huge following because of that. So she has a lot of influence despite actually doing nothing. And I think that's because of this like sort of digital persona that she has built up, enabled by this age in which everyone has a digital persona, and we almost prefer that type of interaction. So it's not a problem that she's not an effective congresswoman and doesn't actually craft policy and doesn't actually perhaps advance the needs of her district from a policy or legislative through a policy or legislative lens, because she's doing the performance that we really care about. And that's why the New York Mag thought it fitting to create this book length tribute to her. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, the rebuttal that I've heard to that is, well, she's moving the needle on the discourse. She's shifting the Overton window, and she's shifting the party's priorities in such a way that, it's becoming more progressive, more socialist, et cetera. And that's a good thing. I'm not persuaded that she actually is managing to do that. Like, I think she's making a lot of waves on social media, but I think, the fact that she's so kind of vehemently refuses to play well with others means that, her impact on the party is certainly a mixed bag. I wouldn't say that it's entirely positive.
Yeah, that completely makes sense. Do you think that this is the future of American politics? We're just going to have, because up and comers see the success that AOC has had, and by success I mean the social following that she's had, and will likely try to replicate that. And even older, wizened politicians, and I mean wizened, not wise, but wizened politicians even see what she's done or what Trump did and think like, oh, maybe that's the play now. We need to focus less on substance and more on performance.
Yeah, and it's very sad. I mean, I think this is basically, this is probably Trump's legacy. In terms of the thing that's going to be most impactful moving forward, is that he basically made it okay to dial your rhetoric intellectually down to the level of jeering on the playground while the class bully gives the class weirdo a wedgie. And this is where we are now. This is how we talk to each other and engage with each other. It's how we expect our leaders, to behave, because it's fun to watch, even if it is tearing the country to shreds. So, and given the instant gratification of the Twitter dunk and of cheering for your side politically like it's a team sport, I just don't think that there's any going back. I think that we're just going to get more and more fragmented and more fractured and more at each other's throats, unless people are willing to just channel all of that energy into watching actual sports. That would be great. Baseball season starting up, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. Today's opening day. I'm a huge baseball fan. I definitely encourage people to watch more sports and less cable news. That would be a really positive development for humanity, I think.
Yeah. Can you imagine?
It'd be fantastic. Let's talk about something more positive, because rather than just complaining about these intractable problems that we don't have solutions for, let's talk about your book, Kat. This is not your first novel, right? This is your third novel?
Yeah, my third solo, and my fourth counting the collaboration that I did with Stan Lee before he passed away. So,
got it. Well, tell us about No One Will Miss Her, and then we can talk about just a little bit of my experience reading it, because it was a really good book, and I greatly enjoyed it and would love to learn more about your process. But first, tell us about the book.
Oh, thanks. So the first thing I have to say is that I can't talk a whole lot about the book, because if I get too in depth into the plot, I will inevitably spoil something that should not be spoiled. But
maybe just give us the opening. yeah, I don't know. Give us the lead basically. Like
Yeah.
what's the setup?
So the book opens on a beautiful fall morning in rural Copper Falls, Maine. The town junkyard is on fire, and in a lovely Airbnb rental by the lake, a woman named Lizzie Willette, who rented out the lake house, is dead on the bedroom floor. And she is, it's not a spoiler to say she's dead because she tells you she is on the very first page. The book opens with her perspective from beyond the grave, and then Lizzie's husband is missing. So of course that's automatically suspicious. And the book follows both Lizzie's telling you her story, how she came to be dead in this house that she owned. And then there's also chapters from the detective who's investigating the case, and chapters from a woman named Adrienne Richards, who lives in Boston a few hours to the south, and who is connected to Lizzie's life and death in ways that I cannot talk about because they would be spoilers.
Yeah. So let's talk about the process, and let me just say from my perspective reading it, started the book. I was like, this is a well-told story. This is well written. I'm enjoying this yarn. It's not exciting. And then it gets really exciting because there's a massive twist that I completely did not see coming, and it was just delightful when it happened. It's like, oh my goodness, this book just jumped up 10 notches as far as level of engagement. Super, super interesting. Let's start with the writing process. So you've written 4 novels now, 3 solo. It's something that I've wanted to do for a long time, but have not had the time to sit down and plan out in detail a novel. I have several novel ideas that maybe one day will materialize, but what's the process look like for you?
So this was an idea that I'd actually had, at this point, it must have been 6 years ago. And I cooked on it for a long time because I felt that it was very promising, and I wanted to do it right if I was going to make it into a book. So I spent a lot of time just kind of letting it simmer. And then the actual writing process, I like to make a plot map, which is less formal than an outline, but more organized than just writing by the seat of your pants. In this case, I knew what the twist was going to be. And so I had to build from there. And because of where the twist comes in the story, it is about halfway through. I needed to construct it. It's sort of leading your reader into a labyrinth with, this secret hidden at the center. So the journey into the labyrinth has to be interesting in its own right. It also has to obscure the monster hidden at the center, so that they don't know. They might know that there's something there, but not what it is. You don't want them to catch too many glimpses of it, but you want it to be possible, if you have somebody who reads a lot of thrillers, to maybe guess beforehand, so that when they get there, and they find out what the twist is, they don't feel as though you've cheated.
Interesting.
It's a real fine line to walk in writing a thriller. People will get upset if you've included no hints. They will also, they'll also get upset if you give it away too early, or they like the being able to figure it out themselves, but not too quickly. But then the journey into the labyrinth needs to be interesting in its own right. People need to be excited about what's happening on the page, so they're not just thinking about what's coming. And then after you arrive at the center, they need to then exit, hand in hand with the monster that you've created.
Right.
And that also has to be interesting and satisfying in its own right. So it's, it's a very long-winded metaphor to describe basically creating something that has a lot of twists and turns, that obscures the secret hidden at the center, and then allows you to resolve it in a satisfying way.
That's really interesting that the goal is to make it not too hard to guess, because I would always, prior to talking to you, I would assume the goal is to make it so no one can guess, and it's just everyone's super surprised by the twist. But it makes sense that you want the dedicated thriller readers to not feel like you cheated, to be able to see the logical sequence that might lead to the twist, so that they can maybe guess it with like 50-50 accuracy or something like that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, people who read a lot in this genre, like they get good at guessing. I did encounter a number of people who were like, "Well, I guessed the twist right off the bat," and it's like, "Well,
wow,
cool. I hope you still had fun."
Yeah, I clearly have a lot more thrillers to read to get to that point because it totally caught me out of the blue. I didn't honestly. I try not to read too many reviews of books that I want to read because I don't want it to sort of spoil details of the plot or twists for me. And so I didn't even know there was a giant twist halfway through, and I wasn't prepared for it. It happened. I was like, "Oh my goodness, how did I not see that?" But yeah, I definitely did not see it at all.
Oh, that's very gratifying to hear.
How long does the writing process actually take for you? It probably depends on the book, but for this one, how long did it take?
Let's see. I had no deadline with this. I was just, I was working on it and I was going to be done whenever I was done. So, I guess it probably took me a year and a half or 2 years to write. And, I have other work that I am doing at the time. I was freelance writing. I have another job teaching yoga here in the community where I live. So, I was staying relatively busy. Then I did recently write another book, and that one just took me, I want to say 6 months. So, wow. It depends. It just depends on.
Is that a fiction work?
Yes.
Is that one's coming out soon?
Yeah, it hasn't been announced yet, but
okay. All right, fair enough. We'll wait for that.
Yeah, I'm not allowed to talk about it yet, but soon.
That's totally fair. All right, cool. Can you say the genre or not even that?
Oh yeah, it's another mystery.
Okay. All right. That's exciting. Well, for this one, No One Will Miss Her. Where can people buy the book? Do you have a favorite? I mean, Amazon, obviously, but I'm kind of I'm very anti-Amazon. So I try to steer people away when I can. I use bookshop.org, but do you have a favorite like indie bookseller that you like to point people towards to sell your book, or is it just wherever books are sold?
No, I mean, bookshop.org is a great one. IndieBound is a great one. You can get it anywhere that you would buy a book. There is also an audio version, which I've heard is very well done. I know that the voice actors that they chose were really spectacular. So
so is it like dramatized? There's different actors for the different voices?
For the different perspective chapters, yeah, they have a different actor for the detective, for Lizzie's chapters, and then for Adrian Richards' chapters. So
cool. Yeah. Neat. Okay. Well, I'll include links to all of those in the show notes for my listeners. Parting question for you, Kat. You're a writer. You spend a lot of time online, and you tend to value alternative opinions and have a lot of your own alternative opinions. So, where do you consume your news? This is something that I'm always on the lookout for, like interesting new podcasts, interesting websites. The unheards of the world where I can find sort of heterodox but interesting and compelling opinions. So what are some of your recommendations for like go-to resources for how to understand what's going on?
So for news analysis and media criticism, I really like The Fifth Column and I like Blocked and Reported. For one-on-one interviews with interesting people, Megan Dahlm's The Unspeakable podcast. These are all podcasts that I'm talking about.
Yep.
And then, I found that listening to sort of multiple takes on the same stories is the best way to get to the truth. I also, at this point, I pull from my experience as a writer. I know when I've worked with an outlet, if I was subject to like rigorous fact checking, or if I was being pushed hard by an editor to like lean in one particular direction or insert some kind of narrative into a piece. So that really factors in, if I had an experience where I wrote for somebody and like I was being pushed hard to like put a spin on it, I trust that outlet less automatically.
Yeah, sure. Sure.
But I mean, also like as a media person, unfortunately, I've become much, much more skeptical of basically everything I read. I spend a lot of time reading between the lines to see what's not being said. And I will tend to read the same story from multiple sources to try and understand like, what the complete picture is. That said, for outlets that cover things, I think very fairly, I think New York Magazine is still pretty good.
Minus the AOC biography.
Minus the AOC biography. But I mean that in and of itself is like, that just tells you something about the culture we're living in. The New York Times, their street reporting that's not necessarily opinion based, can still be quite good. The Atlantic, I think, can still be quite good. And Reason, the magazine, the libertarian magazine, is quite good. So those are my recommendations.
Nice. Yeah, I will include links to all those, including the podcast, in the show notes as well. And Kat, just wanted to say thanks for joining the show today. Really appreciate you. I mean, just a random person on Twitter, that was me, reaching out to you and saying, hey, could you come on the podcast to talk about this? And you were up for it. So I really appreciate you taking the time to do that.
It's my pleasure.
To my listeners, if you want to follow Kat, and I definitely recommend you do. If you're not on Twitter, don't get on Twitter. But if you're on Twitter, you should follow Kat.
Don't do it.
Kat is at Kat Rosenfield. And definitely one of the best follows, I think, that's out there. So just lots of interesting stuff. You can keep with all her writing, and stay tuned. It sounds like for the announcement of her next book, which is that announcement going to come soon, or is that months away, Kat?
Should be really soon.
Okay, cool. Well, I'll stay tuned, and all my listeners should too, at Kat Rosenfield. Kat, thanks so much for joining. And to my listeners, God bless you.